Tomorrow the House of Keys will choose 4 people to become members of the Legislative Council. On agenda and perspective, we've spoken to 14 of the candidates, with the 15th being unavailable for interview. This evening we hear from the final candidate, civil servant Claire Newall, who, while new to politics, has a good understanding of how the system works.
I've been a civil servant here for the last 22 years since I moved with my late husband. Going into politics is something I've always wanted to do. I've done lots of different government departments, different roles, different tasks, drafted legislation, everything, all of that, I guess, has led me to today. Other roles I've done, I've been a foster carer on the island, member of the Legal Aid Appeals Tribunal, all sorts of things. So yeah, here I am today.
So why Legislative Council? What is it that encouraged you to think about standing?
So I looked at MHK, but my strengths and knowledge lean more towards the role of MLC, the scrutineering of legislation, the committees, looking at things in that way, perhaps lend themselves more to my skills and knowledge. And whilst being an MHK and having that constituency, I just felt I could do more in the MLC role.
Okay. So in relation to the work that you do, how is that going to help the skills that you've developed over the years? How is that going to help in your role as a member of the Legislative Council?
So I've drafted legislation previously for Department of Home Affairs, so that's a huge sort of step towards this kind of role, and taking things through Tynwald, writing speeches, Treasury papers, all of the things that go with secondary legislation, assisted with primary legislation. I've got HR knowledge there. I deal with HR on a daily basis now with doctors and GPs and trainee GPs. Kind of really everything I've done, writing training, GDPR. There's so many things there. The foster carers, the case conferences. I don't even know where to start or stop with all of that. It kind of all just sits in one pot for me.
So in terms then of being an MLC, I mean, you don't have the excuse of many people. You've actually worked with politicians, so you know that it's quite an onerous role to take on, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But actually, I'm comfortable in that arena. I guess from starting quite some years ago straight into it with the drafting legislation, I'm used to Tynwald, I'm used to House of Keys, LegCo, the whole sort of standing orders, all of that kind of thing. It's natural to me, and I think some of that comes from just being a civil servant as well, because you are governed by so many rules and regulations and policies. It's natural. I'm not fazed by it. Perhaps hustings is a different matter. That's a whole nother ball game. But generally speaking, it doesn't faze me.
And of course, you're the only candidate that I'll have interviewed that has been interviewed after the Keys hustings.
I'm always like to be different.
So I haven't been able to ask any of the others how that went. But how was that set up? How did you go about effectively selling your case to the MHKs?
I think that's the difficult thing. So the hustings themselves, it was always going to be brutal. And it was. I was under no illusions for that. I researched and spoke to many, many people, MHKs, MLCs, lots and lots of different people throughout my organisation, and others. Did a lot of preparation. You never know what the questions are going to be. And that is the really hard thing. With a job interview, you have the person's spec. You've got an idea of where they're going to ask questions because you can see what they're looking for. I don't know that any of us know what they're looking for, and it is very difficult. One of my weaknesses, I guess, is speaking about myself in a positive light. It always has been. I own up to that. I'm not frightened of it. And I felt that yesterday I didn't really quite push me enough. Have I done enough? I don't know. We don't know until Tuesday.
And of course, we're recording this on a Tuesday.
Yes.
So this of course will be heard by the listener on the Monday before the actual election. Obviously, there are 15 candidates now for just the 4 seats. Where are your expectations in all this?
I don't know. You're asking me, and I guess I've just said I don't talk about myself in a positive light. It's just something in me that I don't do that. I'm all right on paper. Give me a piece of paper and I'll write it down. I don't know.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. I've done my best, and as long as I've done my best and I know that I've done my best, that's all I can ask of myself.
And you mentioned your political ambition in relation to LegCo. You haven't ever thought about the House of Keys?
That was one of the questions from Hustings actually yesterday. As I said just before, I think my skills and knowledge is definitely more along those lines, the scrutinising of legislation, etc. And in fact, when we had the candidates conference a couple of weeks ago, I took along some legislation that had been only in LegCo because it was a private member's bill, and there was a clause in there that I didn't agree with and felt that it needed looking at. And as it was going to Keys next, felt that was the place to kind of make people aware, hang on a minute, look at this. If we don't do this now, it's going to have a huge cost implication apart from anything else. So, I was already kind of picking up those things at that point and showing them. So, am I halfway there?
And in terms of you sort of hinted there at something that I certainly feel is the case. And that is that perhaps the Keys candidates don't really know what it is that they want from members of the Legislative Council, in as much as you are told that your primary role is scrutiny, and yet you sit in Tynwald and take votes on important matters like the budget, finance, policy, all of these things which apparently are
not part of an MLC's
role.
Not
really what an MLC should do. So, first of all, how would you tread that delicate balance of trying to understand what is in the minds of members of the House of Keys? And I think generally Keys don't like being overruled or outvoted by LegCo. How do you tread that delicate path between
the two?
Not upsetting the Keys, but also sticking to your principles?
I think, and I said yesterday very clearly that I will stand up for what I believe in. Of course, compromise is one of those things we all have to do. But when it comes to my own morals and, I won't compromise. And if I am the lone voice, then I am the lone voice. I'm not frightened of that. I have the wider public in my thoughts at making such decisions, and it's them that this affects. It affects all of us. We're all residents, but it's it's those some of those people out there really need some of those decisions looking at hard, and saying yes sometimes is the easy option. I don't do an easy option.
and you will, if you are a member of the Legislative Council, have to consider bills. How do you go about doing that? What are the things, the steps that you would take to look at a bill and say, okay, this bill seems to work, or it doesn't work, or certain elements of it aren't quite what you would hope to find? How would you go about doing that? Do you think?
So the first question I would probably ask myself is, why is it being done? I'd look at any facts, do some research, question the relevant people in the departments, think, and I guess in that there's personal views, political climate, definitely public perception, listening to others' views, debates, all of that kind of thing. Challenge those if necessary. If I'm not happy with something, that's that forms part of it as well. Keeping an open mind, I think, and I guess that's that comes along with listening to others. Is it non-discriminatory? We have to be so aware of all of that, and very much taking accountability for my input. That's got to be top of the list, really. Things to help with that, I guess, are like tracked versions of the documents, particularly if it's one bill, if there's been amendments before, so tracked versions so you can see what's happening. Another concern would be the public shouldn't need to consult an advocate every time they want to look at some legislation. It should be easy. There should be explanatory notes that are easy. The bill should be easy to understand when it becomes an act. We need to make sure that happens.
And as someone who has previously drafted legislation, is that always the case? That it's simple to understand?
That's a question. No, but then I qualify that by saying some of the legislation I drafted was like police regulations, so they are for a specific area. But some of the other legislation was sex offender travel notifications, so that they were right across the board. So yes, they have to be easy to understand. You have to spell it out, because that particular part of legislation needs to be right there. They need to know what's going on. So yeah.
And I guess the fact that you're mentioning this would indicate that perhaps you don't think that is the case in all pieces of legislation.
No, it can be very difficult. I know myself sometimes looking for things when I'm helping a friend, or I want to know something, and I have to really sit and look at it and think, oh, now what does that mean? And sometimes you're looking, is there something behind that? We shouldn't really need to do that. It should just be as it says on the page, and there should be explanatory notes if it's not clear. It's as simple as that for me.
Do members of the Legislative Council have any role in relation to the public, do you think, when it comes to legislative scrutiny, but also your votes in Tynwald?
Yes, because although we don't have a constituency per se, we are representing everyone on the island. So we are, I see it almost as an umbrella over everybody. So our vote, our decision on something impacts everybody, as does the MHK's vote, of course, but they have their constituency people, if you like, who are saying push this through, or what about this, or questioning things. We don't necessarily have that on a daily basis, but yes, it does impact.
And how would you go about communicating with the public? Obviously, social media allows for a significant discourse between politicians and the public, but it also has its downside.
Very much so. And that was very definitely a huge concern for me before I put my papers in for this role. The social media aspect, the trolls, if you will. If people are picking at my work, that's fine. We can talk about that. We can deal with that. But personal insults steps beyond a level at which is acceptable, and that would be dealt with, as necessary. But in terms of my communication outwards, I'm not saying I'd be available 24 hours a day, because we all need, some time, but email, pick up the phone. I will have a page that will be specifically for this role, specifically business, and it will just be business on there, and you can message whenever on that. But yeah, I think social media is great when it works. Does it work all the time? I don't know. Probably not.
And I guess certainly in your role at the moment in Manx Care, you'll have plenty of examples of the negative side of social media.
Yes, and it's very difficult to when you see things and people's perception, because that's what it is mostly, people's perception. I can't reply when I know that what is being said is a lie, or somebody's got the wrong end of the stick, if you will. I'm not in a position to reply. You know, I'm bound by policies and regulations regarding social media, and that's fine. And I will, to be honest, probably keep that as a rule going forward if I'm elected, because I think it's a positive rule. That means you're not putting yourself under any umbrella you don't want to be under, and getting into arguments with members of the public on social media. It's not a good look.
But you can use social media to explain yourself.
Totally. And that's why, you know, I'd said I'll have a page, and I will put things on there and invite people to comment, email. You know, I will be on the Tynwald website. I'll be able to be contacted. So, yeah.
Where are the big political issues, do you think, that the Isle of Man's facing at the moment?
So, first of all, the big elephant in the room, budget. We've just had this year's budget, and you know we're dipping into reserves. Yesterday in hustings I said, whilst that is perhaps necessary, it's not very palatable, and we should be looking to push those departments to do their business within budget. You know, every year pretty much they should be looking to grow their own income, up those fees for building control, for planning, for, you know, animal waste, all of those kind of things, and get some money in to put back into the reserves and build that back up again. The other big one for me, the population growth. I think if we're looking at dumping, say, even if we dumped 5,000 people in right now, we would sink. We would, quite literally. We can't do that.
What do you mean by that?
There is not enough housing. There's not enough places in schools. There's not enough support in schools for children who have special or extra needs, extra educational needs. You know, kids going to university, they don't want to come back. That's just been in the Examiner last week. There's no accommodation for them. There's no affordable housing. You know, we're looking. I know listeners are probably going to go, ooh, when I mention the climate control and the, you know, all of the things that come with that. But it is a very real thing, and we need to be doing our bit. No, our little island of 85,000 people isn't going to make a massive dent in the worldwide climate issue, but we've got to try. We've got to do something. We can't close our eyes to it. And then I think the other really big issue, which I'm only going to touch on because of my role, is health. We know what the issues are. I don't know what will fix it at this moment in time. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that, because, you know, I'm very conscious of my role.
Yes, and obviously as someone who works in Manx care, you may still be working in Manx care after the vote on Tuesday. So, one thing that will probably happen almost immediately after you have been, assuming you are, of course, elected as a member of the Legislative Council, is that you will be approached by several ministers, all giving you offers that you can't refuse in relation to future roles in departments. Is taking up a role in a department something that you would be willing to do? Yes.
Actually, for better or for worse, my interests are in health and education, mainly. So yes, I would. Definitely. I think there are things within education I would like to see changed, amended. And I'll touch briefly on those. There are also things within the health department aside of the budget, so taking that out of the equation, there are things that are quite important to me. So I lost my husband 7 years ago to suicide, and that's the first time I've said that out loud, so, you know, let's just go with that. He unfortunately was bullied at work, and it went on for so long, and there was nowhere to turn, and that was his decision. I'm in a place where I'm okay because I have an explanation, if you like. There are many families in my bereaved by suicide group that don't have explanations. There's been no support for those of us left behind, but equally there's not been particularly a great amount of support for those with mental health issues in the first place. So that's something I would like to look at changing. I know there's a suicide strategy. Not convinced it's actually fit for purpose, if I'm being totally honest. There are things in it that are brilliant and things are moving on with it, but it's not fixing the situation, it's not helping. So that's something I would like to look at. In regards to the school, particularly our younger generation, literacy and numeracy, we take it for granted. There are kids going to high school that can't read and write properly. I can't even get my head around that. And they fall through the cracks because they don't fit into the neurodiverse group or extra needs for other things. And it's a travesty. I just can't get my head around that. And the other thing, I think that probably comes from being a foster carer, is when you leave care. At the moment here, there is nothing. You age out at sort of 16, that 16 to 25 age group. There's no support, there's nothing. So Kerry Sharp did some research and put it in her Children's Champion report 2 years ago now, and looking at legislating the term corporate parent, so that the government is then responsible for that child, and all of those things that a parent would do, the government would do. So making sure they've got an education, making sure they can potentially have further education or a job, helping them with accommodation, teaching them how to make a doctor's appointment, how to open a bank account, all of those things via a social worker. But putting that into a policy, bringing that into legislation, and helping that group of people that, again, they fall through the cracks. They end up at Derby or wherever, because they just don't have that guidance and support that we take for granted. So I think for me, they're two of the really big areas. So I guess that's why I've chosen health and education.
Yeah. And it's very obvious why, in the case of suicide prevention, you would be passionate for that, and also your experiences in foster care give you that passion there as well. Yeah. But imagine that you have, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something that's generally dry and tedious.
Roads!
Well, I don't know, an income tax bill or something like this. How do you get the necessary passion to consider some fairly dry financial legislation? How would you go about doing that, do you think?
I think that, for me, anybody that knows me will be chuckling now. I would probably just get right into the heads of the people that are doing that bill, making that bill, working in that department. Why do you want this? What needs changing? Why does it need changing? What worked before? Why didn't it? And sort of really right back in that very basic admin type thing, and work upwards then and see why we've ended up with the bill. That gives me then an idea of how it's going to change. Because if I'm a member of that department, I'm the one that's taking it through LegCo. I need to know what's going on, because you have no clue what questions are going to be asked, what other people might see that want to be changed, a clause differently worded. Well, if I can answer those questions, it just stops the back and two. So, yeah, get right in the subject area, whatever it is.
And as a legislative officer, as you've been in your career in the civil service, how did you go about briefing politicians, and how much of it is a brief given, and how much of it is hard work on the part of the politician to actually then understand?
Depends on the politician. That's as diplomatic as I get.
Yeah.
But seriously, I think some get it more than others, and I think that is absolutely down to where their interests are, where their knowledge base is. You know, I could come up with anything, why the price of apples needs to be that, for example, and, you know, it might not be on their radar at all, so they're finding it difficult to understand, so you've got to spell everything out. But sometimes you could just go and say, sign this, I've done this.
Well, believe it or not, we've almost reached the end of the time allotted.
How on earth did we get there?
But you've got 20 seconds to say why should a member of the House of Keys pick you in particular?
I am passionate about what I do. I love the Isle of Man, and I have so much more to give than I am currently doing in my role. I really will do my absolute best for the island. It's just something I've always wanted to do, and time's right for me to try.
That was civil servant Claire Newall. So you've had your chance now to hear from all the candidates who could spare the time to be interviewed. Have you made up your mind? Who would you pick? And would your choice be the same as the MHK's? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gaughan. Goramayo, thanks for listening.